So everyone, thank you very much for joining, and thanks to the people that have volunteered some information about themselves. It just helps with a bit of context around who our audience is. And we're very lucky today to be joined by Georgie Silverwood. So I'll go into a bit more about Georgie's profile in a minute, but the things that we do want to discuss today is how you can stand out from others in the graduate market. So yes, we appreciate that it's probably more hyper-competitive now than it ever has been before due to COVID-19. And it's not an easy time to be graduating over the next 12 months because there aren't as many jobs out at the minute. But we were just talking to Georgie offline saying that we're both seeing, or we're all seeing a little bit of an uptick now in the economy, an uptick in people looking for staff. It seems like business activity is starting to pick up again. Now that creates enormous opportunity for the people that are ready to jump on it because businesses have had to downsize. There's been millions of jobs lost and they're going to have to scale up again, which means they are looking for fresh talent as they start to scale up. So it may actually be an advantage because businesses have downsized, now they've got to go and employ again and they can choose from anyone when they employ again. So it could actually be an advantage, and I'd be interested in Georgie's thoughts on that a bit later too. We'll talk about education qualifications versus work experience. I think it was Hermione just mentioned that she's gone and done a course at HR Block in addition to her degree. Really important. And Dom was very quick to say how desirable it is having those extra courses. We'll talk about what modern organisations are looking for and what they're seeking in new employees, particularly graduates. The importance of networking. Dom mentioned before about the hidden job market. Networking and making connections is just crucial to actually landing a job. The importance of a compelling 30-second elevator pitch, tactics for building high-value professional network, and more strategies about coming out the other side of COVID-19, which I think in Australia, we are definitely, I think, on the back end of it. Let's hope it stays that way, but there is opportunities coming with that. So, introduce ourselves. I'm Gerard Holland and I'm one of the co-founders of Outcome.Life, and on your screen you'll see Dominic Saporito, who is my business partner. Outcome.Life was founded in 2015 to help international students get jobs, and we do that through running lots of networking events, facilitating high quality internships, running industry-based projects, and we do a startup pre-accelerator as well for international students. Now, if you do have any questions, there is a chat box down below on your screen. Please write the questions in there. Dom loves reading questions and he loves answering them even more. So we will try to answer every single question. So the more interactive you can make it, the better we can make sure we tailor the discussion with you. Georgie has a wealth of knowledge and can talk about lots and lots of different things. So if we know the things that are concerning you or you would like advice on, we can make sure we take the conversation that way. We'd also like to acknowledge Bupa. So today's webinar is being supported by Bupa. For those that don't know, they are a premium health insurance provider for international students and temporary resident graduates, people on temporary resident visas, and as well as being experts in mental health and wellbeing. Bupa is also taking an active position in enhancing employment opportunities for international students, which I think is just fantastic that a health insurance provider is actually being really proactive in looking at employability, because ultimately that's what students want, right? Is a job at the end of their degree. For more information on Bupa, you can go to their OSHC site. I will put that link in the chat shortly, where you can get all information about what Bupa services are. So I'd now like to throw over to Georgie. It's not about me as much as I'd like it, and Dom would love it to be about him, but today is about Georgie and using her wealth of knowledge. And we're delighted that Georgie can join us today. Georgie is a partner at international executive search firm Amrop Carmichael Fisher, and was the previous head of graduate recruitment for PwC, and also a manager of experience recruitment for PwC in China as well. So has experience in Asia and in Australia. Along with her recruitment, Georgie has worked extensively with organisations in relation to internal and external talent management strategies, diversity and global talent mobility. And Georgie was involved in the recruitment of thousands of graduates, postgraduate students and school leavers from Australia and internationally, particularly through the Asia Pacific region, and knows what it takes for them to stand out. It's not easy to stand out in a short amount of time at graduate level, so getting all these tips of the trade are very important. Some more interesting information on Georgie is that before moving into HR and recruitment, Georgie spent 3 years working as an auditor. So we won't hold that against her because Dom and I have both done audit as well. But Georgie believes, and so do we, that your first career move is not your last. You will definitely take lots of turns during your career. After leaving PwC, Georgie spent 2 years working in a startup based in Melbourne and New York. And whilst she ultimately left the organisation, it taught her a lot about resilience, speed, decision-making and being agile, and skills she sees as being critical in the current environment. And so Georgie has a flavour for IT as well. So really, Georgie has a great cross-reference of skills that we know on this call. We've got accountants and business commerce students and IT. But Georgie also lived in Beijing for 2 years with her husband and had their first child there. It is her favourite part of the world. It's devastating her that she can no longer travel to China, where they go every year. I don't think 2020 will be a year you'll be going there, Georgie. And they put their daughter into Mandarin summer school, so keeping that connection. Welcome, Georgie. I'm rambling on too long now, but thank you for joining us. And maybe first of all, how are you and how have you found the whole COVID situation?
I am good. I think, as we were discussing before, Jared, it's lovely to be starting to kind of poke our heads up and come back to some kind of normalcy after, some really interesting times. And I was reflecting on it before, and I think when I was in the middle of lockdown and when we were all stuck at home, I was thinking I needed to take more advantage of having that downtime. And now that it's sort of coming out of it, I've realised I didn't get the opportunity to do quite everything that I wanted to in terms of reading and even my sort of furthering my own knowledge base and self-learning. I think I spent a lot more time just running around after 2 kids, but it is lovely to be starting to see the economy and society and things start to move back forward again. And I'm loving things like hearing that my favourite restaurants are reopening, and you're seeing the regular cafe people, getting out and about, and I'm optimistic. I think that there's definitely some good signs out there, and I'm hopeful that is going to be good for all of us, particularly all of you guys who are getting to that stage of thinking about a graduate role or an internship or what have you. I'd like to think that we're very much in a V, not a tick, and that things will bounce back fairly quickly.
I very much hope that as well. I mentioned before that you started in audit, where I definitely spent a few years. So you have had a bit of a similar career path to Dom and myself, where you have moved around. Talk us through what your career has been.
Yeah, sure. I came from country Victoria, so I grew up about 3 hours southwest of Melbourne, in a beautiful small city, and it was a great place to go to school, but always the view was, for most students at the high school that I went to, that if you wanted to have a professional career, you really needed to move away, because the majority of the people where I grew up were either in health services, allied health services, or in farming and agriculture. So it was always figured that I would, move away from my hometown and move to Melbourne for university, which I did. And it's a funny one. You kind of don't know what you want to do when you leave year 12. And so I did a really general degree, which I'm very glad that I did. I did commerce and arts, actually. And again, even when I was sort of getting through to that stage of the last half of my university, I still wasn't completely certain about the career path that I wanted. And I think, to your point before, that's absolutely okay. We don't know what we want to do for the rest of our lives, I think, for a long time. And in fact, sometimes you never know, and things just ebb and flow. So I chose to do an accounting major in my commerce degree, accounting and finance, and that allowed me to then apply for roles with the big 4 accounting firms, and led me to PwC. So I think I saw a comment from Dom before that said, yuck, auditing. And I must say that I am very glad that I did auditing for the time that I did. And I'm very glad that I then qualified as a chartered accountant through that. But I'm also glad that I reflected on the things that I was really good at, and the parts of the role that I loved, and the parts that I could happily leave behind. And then I took that experience and shifted that into a different career path, which was very much to move into HR and recruitment. And I was really lucky that when I was at PwC, those first few years, you were able to really move around within the organisation. They had a huge focus on keeping people in the organisation, but giving them lots of different career opportunities. And so I was able to originally do an internal transfer, an internal internship, for want of a better word, into graduate recruitment and help run a graduate recruitment campaign for that particular year. And I never left, essentially. So I stayed in the HR team at PwC and moved into different roles within that organisation for a few years before I got the amazing opportunity to move to China and essentially run their experienced recruitment and graduate recruitment over there, which I did for a couple of years. And then again, returned home to Australia and took on some more talent-based and strategic, what they called strategic recruitment, strategic talent and leadership type roles within PwC, still in the HR function, which was great. So I was really lucky to work in one firm for all of 14 years and have, I think, 4 or 5 different careers in that time. And then after that, as Jared said, I started to look beyond PwC and moved into a few different roles. So worked for a startup, which was fantastic, a startup called Talentbox, which looked at video interviewing for students and professionals who were looking for their next role. And it's a really interesting one because it was very new technology at the time, and people in some ways struggled to understand the benefit. And I keep thinking now, if that organisation had have kicked off, in the past few months, they would be a very, very successful business, because never more than now have we realised how important it is to use technology in recruitment and technology in developing your career. And there's very much a comfortableness with all of us in terms of being able to use that effectively. So I worked with them for a couple of years, and that was a really exciting opportunity to learn what it was like to work in an organisation from the ground up, where you didn't have lots of spare money to spend on things. It was very much about driving the business and working really hard and working really flexibly and being agile, and focusing on things like product development and the user experience. And I did get to learn a lot about IT, which was very different for me, but really exciting. And then I left there and did some consulting work directly with my own business for a while. And then I put that business into Amrock Carmichael Fisher, which is a global executive search firm and leadership and talent firm, who I still work with today. So that's kind of my career path, and I think it's a good lesson in, I think, 2 things. One, where you start is never where you finish, but 2, that it is really always about, I think to Dom's point before, figure out what you're good at and figure out what you love. And if you focus on that, I think there's an old saying, you'll never work a day in your life, but more importantly, I think you'll also be very successful and reach your full potential. And I like to think that I made some really good decisions around what I loved and where I got my energy from, and really tried to focus on those areas in my career, which has led me to now.
So your career has jumped around all over the place.
Mm-hmm. It has.
Would you say that is normal or not normal?
I think if you talked to some generations, so if I think about my father, for example, he started off in the Air Force working and designing plane engines, but it was always that you, as part of that, got to get a university degree. So the government used to pay for your university degree, and then you had to serve essentially the government or serve Australia in terms of what you did. So he then was almost beholden to work for the government for the next X number of years. So he did that, and then he also moved that into kind of teaching, but essentially he had the same career for the first 20 years of his life. And I remember when I was a teenager, he suddenly decided to flip that on its head and literally quit his long-term career and move into finance, and built a really successful finance business, a rural finance business in Warrnambool. And people thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
Because he was of that generation where the key focus was get a qualification, have a stable job, work for your employer, be loyal, and you'll have a nice life, and and that is it. And so if you flip that then to I suppose my generation, and then I think about you guys all coming out of university and your generation, that is completely different. I think that actually people celebrate and respect people who take risks, people who can demonstrate that they are agile in the way that they think and how they apply their skills to different roles. And in fact, I think seeing a CV that has the same role for 20 years can actually be a detriment to your opportunity for success. So I think it's changed a lot. I think that there is no normal anymore in terms of a career, but I love seeing people who have tried different things. I love seeing people who have failed. I love seeing someone who moved into a role and maybe only lasted 6 to 12 months because they worked out really quickly that the organisation's values or the actual technical requirements of the role or the job specification just didn't align to them. But they were good at that kind of fast failing and saying, okay, this is not right for me. I need to proactively make a move and go and do something else. And I've always said everyone gets 1 to 2 chances to make a mistake in their career, absolutely. And it's about how you explain that. So I don't think there is a normal, but I certainly don't think staying in a career, one job for your whole life is normal.
Yeah, and I think you've heard it from an ex-head recruiter of PwC saying they not only is it okay to fail, it's actually liked, it's encouraged. It's great to see when people fail. And I think a lot of graduates probably struggle with that because they think they've got to nail it in their first job and they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And my dad worked for Spotless for 25 years. It was a bit of a loaded question I just asked you. But these days, employers are sort of they're factoring in that people will probably stay 2 years and then they'll move on. But that's the mindset of an employer now, that longevity, it doesn't exist anymore in the new generation. And so as a graduate, expect that your career is going to bounce around all over the place. So that's the expectation for it. So be ready for it. I quickly just want to mention something about China, and that when you speak about China, that your face lights up, and it's an amazing opportunity that you had. And now we're sort of on the reverse of that, where we interact with a lot of people that may have moved from, could be China, it could be from anywhere around the world, and have moved to Australia. It's like that you saw it as an opportunity by moving to China. Like you didn't see it as a barrier or a challenge, in that you didn't grow up in China and so you didn't have all those advantages, but you sort of took an opportunity and said, well, you've got experiences from somewhere else. How do you then take that into a Chinese environment and take advantage of it? Would I be correct?
Yes, you would be. And it's a really interesting way that we ended up there, because some of you might be aware that a lot of the big professional services firms have a real focus on, at some point in your career, if you do plan on being there for quite a while, that they like you to have an alternative experience. And it plays into exactly what we were talking about in terms of take the skills you've got and challenge yourself to do something with them in a different way. And one of the things that PwC was always big on is that if one day you want to be a director, a partner, or a really senior person in the organisation, they like to see that you have had some overseas experience, or maybe you've been seconded and spent a couple of years working at a client, but just doing something different than the same job for and just progressing up the ranks for all of that time. And so my husband also worked at PwC, and so we hit a point in our careers where it was time to think about how could we challenge ourselves with a new experience. And the conversation was around, if you were to go overseas, where would that be? And there were at the time opportunities to go to London, there were opportunities to go to New York, Texas, and then there were opportunities to go to parts of Asia, China being one of them. And I think there was also an opportunity to go to Russia. But at the time, China was really just starting to open up its markets, and they had just won the bid for the Olympics. There was lots of stuff going on over there, and it seemed like a place that would be really exciting, could add to our skill set, but would also actually take us outside of our comfort zone. And so my sense was that we're much better, if we want to get out of that experience, all of those things, we should choose somewhere that isn't just going to be a bit like living in a bigger Melbourne. And so we made the active choice to go to Beijing. And there is not one point in my life that I regret doing that. So I think it taught me a lot about me. At times it was really hard because my Mandarin is still terrible, but at the time was pretty much non-existent. And it's really hard when you're trying to navigate a country with different cultures, different languages, and everything is just a different political system. It was just quite different. And so there were times when it was tough, but there were never times when I thought it wasn't the best thing I ever did. So
amazing how deliberately putting yourself out of your comfort zone has been the most rewarding thing you've ever done. And I think that is a really massive takeaway, particularly for a lot of people on the webinar, that, it is a big commitment, and it is putting yourself out of your comfort zone to come to Australia to study. But we hope it will be the most rewarding thing to do, because I think that's when, after adversity is when really good things happen. So I think it's a really great story. I did want to mention too that I'm glad I was an auditor. So I'm glad I don't do it now, but the learnings I got from being in audit, created me as the business person I am today. So it's all part of the journey. You did mention about resilience and agility being really important, particularly when you went to a more tech startup. And for anyone starting a business too, timing is so crucial in business. It's a really hard thing to control. There's a company I met recently called My Interview, which are doing some really cool stuff in that digital interviewing. That sounds like the exact same thing that the business you went to is doing, but they're 7-8 years later probably. And the timing now is perfect for them, and it's really working in their favor. So in business, timing is a very, very big factor in success. But 2020 early on compared to now is completely different. So the world was turned on its head, and we're still going to go through this for the rest of the year. I just wonder, what advice do you have to the people listening about dealing with that level of change, whether from a mindset point of view and, just probably getting the most out of the next 6 and 12 months, but getting your minds right to be able to be prepared for that, because it is hard to take on such drastic change.
It is. And I think we're seeing the best and worst of people coming out through how everyone is managing that change. And I don't think there's a right or wrong in terms of how people react and feel, and how you experience it can be really different to other people. So, if I just think about my own network, I have friends who have loved being in lockdown. They are naturally more introverted. They felt like it was a chance to step back, sit down and relax and take some time for themselves. And they were perhaps lucky enough that they weren't also then thinking about, where's my next paycheck coming from? How is my business going? They were lucky that they either worked in organizations or had, the ability to fund that. And then I've got friends who, for various reasons, have found it really, really challenging. And, they've struggled with the change. They don't like not being in control. They have gone through almost, those 7 stages of grief in 3 months. And, there's anger, there's sadness, there's everything. And I think there is no right or wrong, and everyone is going to react differently. What works for me might not work for everyone else, but I think that people who are naturally resilient will always find it a little bit easier, I think, to sit in the uncomfortableness of change and not being in control. But I also think there's ways and strategies that you can feel more resilient or feel more in control by managing yourself. And the big one for me is, some of you might have heard of the whole concept of circle of influence and circle of control. And it's really around saying there's some things that you can control and you should focus on those things. And then there's some things that you can't control. And if you can't control it and it's outside your circle of influence, then don't focus on that, because there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what will send you into a bit of a spiral. So when I think about that for me, and I think about, what I could focus on during that kind of lockdown period and even going forward, and it's going to be similar for you guys when it comes to things like self-learning and networking and all that sort of stuff. So I couldn't change the fact that there was COVID. I couldn't change the fact that there was a virus that had meant that we all went into lockdown. So I really had to just sit there and say, kind of sucks and it's awful, but it's awful for everyone, and that's not something I can do anything about. So what can I do? What I can do is think about my work and my business has slowed down because less people want to be recruiting people, or less people want kind of leadership consulting right now. But what I can do is spend that time continuing to drive my network, having conversations with my clients who are going through really interesting times themselves and might also be feeling really uncomfortable and really worried. Just have good conversations with them around how they're feeling, how their business is going. Because even though it's not going to lead to any work at the moment because there's nothing on the table, if I'm that person who gave them a call just because, I cared, then in 6 months' time, when some work pops up, maybe they'll think of me, not think of someone else who didn't bother to make that phone call. So I did things like that. I must admit, I wanted to do more self-learning in terms of reading and spending some time looking at some interesting research in the space that I work in. And I probably didn't do as much of that, but I was thinking about those sorts of things, and that kind of made me feel like time wasn't being wasted. I did enjoy the fact that I didn't have to get up every morning and do the school run. So I actually enjoyed some more time with my kids. And that was a really lovely bonus that I got, which, otherwise wouldn't have been the case. But it was really around saying, what can I actively do that's in my control versus what I can't do.
So Georgie, when you're assessing, sorry to cut you off, when you're assessing that, what's some tips for how to do that appropriately? Because do you sit down and do you get a whiteboard or pen and paper out and write down what you can control and what you can't control and use that to conceptualize?
Actually, I do. So I think the auditor comes out in me. And it's actually a really good exercise, because you do the diagram where you've got things that you can't control in the centre, and then the circle of influence around the outside, and they're the things you can control. And it was almost more like a to-do list. Things that I can do over the next few months that are going to be helpful to me in terms of continuing to develop my career and my business, even if right now I'm not going to see the impact of those. So for you guys, if I think about the past few months, so, for example, you haven't had face-to-face learning opportunities at university, you'll have been doing Zoom lectures, you won't have been able to do collaborative face-to-face project work, so you can't connect with your fellow students as much as you might have liked. And, you might be thinking about things like, my part-time job is at risk, or, how am I managing all of those sorts of external things that are a huge part of everyone's life. And I suppose for me, it's around thinking of the things that you can do that might not help today, but are definitely going to set you up for success in the future. And, as we said, hopefully this is a V, and there's some optimism, and yes, it will be slow to pick up in terms of graduate roles and the graduate market, but it will pick up. And when it does, if you have done things like, an H&R block accounting qualification during the spare time that you've had, if you have done some self-learning around new tech programs, new coding skills, whatever it might be, that just gives you that extra little bit of learning or extra little bit of qualification that might mean that you're one step ahead of your fellow or your competitor when it comes to a job, then that period of time hasn't been lost, and you've been able to control things that are actually going to help you, even though maybe it's been pretty average in terms of all the things that you can't do. So yes, I do. I'm a nerd, and I do sit down and write stuff down, and it does help because it keeps me accountable.
Yeah, and I think it's good advice that writing it down does make a difference, and there's probably lots of things you can find on Google as to some of those strategies to help you conceptualize it. I like how you said that you've made sure you've reached out to people during this time. Not that they're going to give you any work tomorrow, but in September or October or February next year, when they need service or expertise that you have, you want them to pick up the phone to you. And I think there's good lessons in that for even graduates. And Dom, I'm sure you have some views on this too, in that it's really hard to go and get a job as a data scientist probably right now, or maybe as a tax accountant because everyone's been downsizing. But Dom and Georgia, I'll put this question to both of you. What can graduates be doing now? That self-learning, we're seeing lots of discussion talking about, people learning Azure and people learning Kubernetes, fantastic. And that's what we love to see, because that's controlling what you can control, is learning that stuff. But what's some things that students could be doing to maybe reaching out to organisations that they do want to work in at the future, as to how maybe they might be able to offer some value to them during this time, that maybe they could be front and centre as we come out of it?
Well, there's lots of answers to that. I'll go first. A big thing, you and I own 2 IT companies, Jared, and most of the people that we've employed as their first job. But one thing that we look for with every single person, we ask them, what have you done in your own time? Because we really do value people that, if you're a front-end web developer, that they've actually done some projects in their own time. And they are able to demonstrate to us that this is what they love to do and that they're good at it. And so suddenly those people, if we've got, a dozen, 2 dozen, 100, 200 applications, the people that have done this in their own time suddenly go to the very top of the list. And it didn't matter so much that they didn't actually have formal experience, but the fact that they've done something in their own time really shows us, demonstrates us that it is of interest to them, and it demonstrates the value that they can bring to a business. And we look for that so much. The number of times I've had someone in front of me that says they're a front-end web developer, and I've pushed them my computer and said, good, show me. And they've said, oh no, I don't have anything on the web. They're not the people that we want. And so we're looking for those people who in their own time really do demonstrate that they have done some things that will help them in their first job. That'd be my tip. Do stuff in your own time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other big one is networking. I know it's hard at the moment because obviously we can't go to a face-to-face kind of networking event at university or a session by an employer in a lecture theatre the way you normally would. But, the use of technology and using things like LinkedIn and other business networking tools properly is a huge advantage. And it's amazing how many people, when you ask the question, can I catch up with you, normally for a coffee, but can I catch up with you for a quick Zoom chat? Because I'd love to pick your brain around your career or the business you work in. Most people are pretty happy to talk about themselves, and they're happy to listen to someone who's 12 years back from where they are right now and let them know about their journey. And, I reflect on that myself, and I've got 2 phone calls this week that are literally people who have managed to connect to me through 1 or 2 other connections who just want to have a chat, not to work with me, but just to have a chat around, I'm thinking about a career in HR and I'd love to just hear more, or I'd love to work in professional services. You're at PwC. Can I just chat to you around maybe what the best thing is to do in terms of the subjects I choose or what have you? And I actually don't know those people. But I do know their prior colleague or someone else, and I have no issue in having that conversation because it's nice to hear from people who are motivated. But it also means that when someone comes to me in 6 months' time and says, oh, we're looking for a accounting grad and I can't find anyone good and they need to have had this background and experience, I might say, I met this person, I spoke to them, I know that's what they do, I can connect you and you can have a chat. So
you might have a friend that says, I really need a tax accountant. It's tax season, it's July, we're so busy.
Yeah.
And it might just mean that Hermione on this call, maybe she reaches out to you on LinkedIn after this and writes a really nice message and says, hi, Georgie, thank you so much for the webinar today. It was fantastic. I was the young lady that did the H&R block. Would I be able to connect with you? Now, my advice to her after that would be, and I think you just said it, Georgie, is don't then ask Georgie for a job. Yeah. But say to Georgie, I would really like to get some advice. This is what I'm thinking about doing with my career. Make it really personal and direct. I don't know where to go next. You have a wealth of experience. Could I get 15 minutes of your time on a quick Zoom call to ask you a couple of questions? I'd be so grateful. I'm pretty sure Georgie's going to say, you know what, no problem, because I can guarantee, and Dom and I, we test this all the time. When we present to 100 people and we say this, only 1 to 2 people ever actually do it.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is the 1 to 2 people that do it always actually get the coffee or the Zoom meeting because everyone else didn't. So then Georgie only has to have 1 meeting or 2 meetings instead of having 100 because everyone else assumes that everyone else will do it, but they never do. Yep. So ask for advice from people, and Dom is a great example of this. Dom loves giving people advice. You cannot stop him. So people do really enjoy giving advice. But don't ask for a job. Ask if you can get some advice from them. It's really important.
And I think one of the really interesting things coming out of the whole pandemic and the change in our economy, and the fact that, yes, it's probably unlikely that big organisations are going to go out and say, I need 100 grads for the 2021 start of the year. But I think what will tend to happen is that they'll be cautious and they'll have jobs pop up at sporadic times over the next year to 18 months. So they won't be recruiting in that way to say, there's a campaign going on for 100 jobs, everyone put your applications in and go through a process. It will be more thinking, okay, well, actually I do need 2 grads now. We've realised this part of the business has just picked up and we're ready now to recruit. And that's when this kind of market for graduates that is not the overt see an ad in the university pages or see an ad on Seek and go for it will happen. It will be more that process of your network will matter. You'll find out about jobs in different ways. People will use their connections. And so I think that's where that networking piece is going to be really important, because there's going to be a market for jobs that's not loud and out there the way it normally is.
It was interesting that we had a terrific young lady who did an internship with one of our clients who just finished up last week. And although because of COVID, there was no position for her at that host company. However, with a couple of weeks to go, she had a chat with her supervisor and said, look, I'm really looking for a job. And she didn't have PR. So, she was an international. And the gentleman that she was working for, because she's done such a terrific job at the host company during that internship, he rang a friend and said, hey, I've got this terrific young lady. This is what she does. You might want to, check her out. She's got some good skills. And again, the timing was exactly right. And lo and behold, she contacted us yesterday to say that she's starting a full-time job on Monday with the friend of the person that she got referred to. So that's the power of your network and actually asking. And I think, that's a really good example. And I think we do have a video on that, because I had a video chat with her yesterday that if I can find it, I'll post it in the chat for you to have a look at.
And I think what's happened in this environment is, yes, we are on digital and we're online. And I presented at another university on Saturday, and every single student had their camera off. So I was talking to a blank screen, and I really called the students out on it. I said, well, here you are in a different world, in a different environment. If we were having a meeting and I put a paper bag on my head and cut the eyes out, you'd probably say I was rude. And I think the penny dropped for some of the students when I think there is your opportunity. We're in a digital environment right now. Turn your cameras on. And the 4 people we had a quick chat to at the start of this webinar, I don't know what any of you look like. Neither does Dom and neither does Georgie, because none of you put your camera on. So it's one tip that I've taken away from this COVID is when everyone's digital, turn your cameras on so people can see your face and they can see your body language and they can see who you are. It is a massive lost opportunity by not doing that. And I think people have forgotten that in this digital world.
It would be almost as bad as going to a meetup with your mate and finding the chair in the furthest corner of the room you could possibly find and sit down and only talk to your mate. And Jared, that is a pet hate of ours. And we've actually stopped putting chairs out now, Georgie. We won't even put a chair out because we know that the people who are a little bit shy will go and sit on those chairs and not talk to anyone. So again, this is about getting out of your comfort zone, going to meetups, going to online meetups, showing your face. Don't sit in the corner. Don't bring your friends. Like whenever I go to a meetup, I never take my wife ever because she'll want me to get her a drink and look after her every night. No, this is work. So go on your own, speak to people in the room, increase your network. So yeah. Very important.
I think that's right. And it comes back to the getting out of your comfort zone. It's not easy to walk into an empty room. It's similar, into a full room when you don't know anyone. And it's similar in a situation where you don't know people on a Zoom call. But I think an employer would say that he or she loves the individual that can walk into a room and strike up an interesting conversation with someone they've never met, because then they are thinking, well, if I've got a client or a supplier or someone I'm wanting them to engage with and they're working for me, they'll be able to do that, because that's life. You regularly go into meetings with clients and people that you've never met, you've never seen, you've got no background on, and somehow you've got to find the way to make a connection really quickly and then hopefully lead to a good relationship, some work or whatever it might be.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Georgie, because there's an article I read a couple of years ago from PwC. Now, you may have been there. So maybe even wrote the article, I don't know. But it said that PwC, and this is probably going back 5 years or something, but it said that PwC had stopped hiring accounting graduates in their accounting divisions. So accounting qualification, it used to be, I know when I graduated, if you didn't have an accounting major, you could not apply for the big 4 accounting firms to work in the accounting teams. And they said, we're now going to hire art students into the accounting division. And we're like, whoa, what's going on here? And their reasoning was fascinating. They said that they could train an art student to do accounting easier than training an accounting student to build those soft and critical and complex capabilities of what you just said before, building rapport with clients, having meaningful conversations, getting people to not like you, maybe is not the right term, but building those relationships. And they flipped it on its head. They said the soft and the complex capabilities are actually more desirable than the technical capabilities because you can teach the technical capabilities. And I think it sort of raised a question I wanted to ask you about the blending of commerce and IT, because we've got commerce and IT students on the line now because that's what the university offers. But it's been a real blend over the last 10 years, maybe even longer. It's almost like they're the same type of people that can go into the same type of roles. Mm-hmm. And so I want to get your thoughts around what you've seen happen and what that evolution's been like. And more importantly, going into the future, how does the merging of commerce and IT implicate what maybe graduates and the roles they're looking for and the diversity of roles they can now apply for?
Yep. And I think you're right. I think it is much harder to teach some of those softer skills than it is to teach technical capability. When someone is smart enough, they can pick up any technical skill. They can learn it partly on the job and they can do extra learning once they're in that particular role. It's much harder to teach someone relationship skills and social skills and learning to pick up cues in terms of how you do things like business development, because that's stuff that takes a lifetime to learn, and you tend to learn it quite intrinsically just through your experiences. So that's certainly what PwC was thinking when they went down that path, and it was very much modelled on what a lot of the big consulting firms like your McKinseys and Bostons of the world, who have never cared about the degree that someone does. They care about critical thinking, the ability to analyse information quickly, and then those softer key skills that people need to be able to apply, a methodology of consulting to any type of organisation that they're going to work with. So that's why. And when you think about IT and commerce, firstly, I would say of all the degrees that are going to be, I think, really relevant in the next couple of years, particularly with everything that has been going on, commerce and IT are two of the best I think you could have picked. So to all of you guys out there, I think you're choosing very relevant and great degrees in terms of being able to then parlay that into a career. Whether you think about, I know Hermione was mentioning tax before, and again, tax, if you think about Australia, we've got such a complex tax system now with all of the new things that have come in for COVID. Again, like that's a whole new industry that is built off the back of new tax legislation. And likewise, IT and things like data scientists, think about all the information that we're trying to pick up at the moment in relation to people's movements through the app for COVID, so that we can contact trace and track people. Again, it's a whole new industry we never knew was even going to exist until now. So good degrees. And then I think in terms of the fact that there is a real blend of both, I think the world and the world of business is becoming far more connected in terms of how companies think about their organisation and their strategy. So back in the day where you might say, well, I need to do work in relation to my IT and get my HRIS system or my payroll system working effectively so that I can have a good payroll system, or I need to look at my business strategy and make sure my business strategy is right so I can run my business appropriately and make good decisions. It's all blended now. There's so much interconnectedness that you can't think about things individually in an organisation. And so that means that whether you're talking about IT or you're talking about tax or you're talking about the audit that your organisation might be about to go through, you can't think of that in isolation, but you need to look at it, completely. So I think when we think about IT, these days in an organisation, it's all about how does the IT enable my business to be more efficient, to be more successful, to be ready to be agile, to capture opportunities, to collect information in a way that allows me then to use that information to make strategic business decisions. So IT is actually an enabler for success, not just a set of systems. It's an ecosystem, I guess, as you would say. And likewise with commerce, again, the decisions you make around how you account for things, or the decisions you make around your approach to stock control has an impact on every part of your business. So I think more and more people who can think of businesses more broadly and can have conversations in areas they don't always work in, it's going to make you a much better business advisor, a business leader, and it means that organisations are going to want to hire you. So there has been a real blend, I think, not just of IT and commerce, but of many, I suppose, vocations and skill sets. But I think, IT and commerce now just, go together, and you can't really talk about one without the other. And I think you even see that in the degrees that people do, that, there's business components to your Masters of IT, there's IT components to people's commerce degrees. Universities are recognising that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, but I think it touches on an important point. I think a lot of internationals, and this might be a cultural thing, they really do focus on the academic skills, and they don't focus on being able to articulate an opinion. And this is what meetups are all about. When you go to a meetup and you speak to people, you're not going to speak to them about the latest exposure draft that the Institute of Chartered Accountants putting out there. It's about, how do we solve the problems of a business? And what internationals don't realise is that that's the interview. You don't need to apply for a job. If you can go to a meetup and meet people in industry and have an opinion and be memorable and show that you can really think deeply about things, that's where you get hired. You can't do that on a resume, or it's difficult to do that on a resume and difficult to differentiate yourself. And you won't get that opportunity until you go for an interview. But they're just so hard to get. So hence why, we always tell people, network. Any opportunity you get to get in front of people, use it, take it, and that way you can explain to people the value that you can bring.
You raise a good point there, Dom. And so, George, you've personally been responsible for thousands of students being recruited. So how important is that 30-second elevator pitch? So, someone's turned up to a meet-working event, they've just bumped into Dom, and Dom says, nice to see you here tonight. Tell me about yourself.
Yep.
What tips do you have for coming? We find a lot of students and graduates really struggle with this. Like, they really do struggle to have their pitch in a compelling way. What tips do you have for putting together a nice 30-second minute elevator pitch?
Yeah, I think it's all about differentiation. So I have heard elevator pitches from many people over the years, and it is something that sticks with you. So it's really important that you take advantage, because also remember that maybe there's only a few people from an organisation, a few recruiters in the room, and there might be 100 students or 100 people who are looking for roles. So you really want to stand out from the crowd. And so differentiating yourself, I think, is key. So yes, obviously you have to talk about the basics. It is relevant to know what you're studying and what your career aspirations are. But my view is always, add something in that makes you a bit different. So add something in that's unique to you, or that's unlikely to be something that someone else will talk about. And that might be an interest that you have. So a particular skill set or a strength that you have. It might be you're a ballet dancer as well as, doing this particular degree. It might be where you're from and your background and coming to Australia in that journey and how you arrived here. It might be that, outside university, you're also working in a cafe, 20 hours a week or what have you, and you've learned to become a barista, but something that just separates you from the pack. It's 30 seconds, it's not very long, but what it should give the individual is an opportunity to, or the person you're talking to, is to pick up on a couple of points they might like to ask more questions on. So it's not your whole CV, it's just a few snippets that then allow that conversation to naturally flow. But I would say that the key thing is come up with something that's a little bit different that makes people interested.
Yeah,
they want to talk more.
And I particularly like the people who have an opinion. I love to hear, and I do this all the time. I say to people, I hate Microsoft with a passion because I don't want to pay for something I can get free from Google. But I think having an opinion about something, rightly or wrongly, I think really helps. Even barring for Collingwood tells me something about people that, you're not quite right, perhaps, or something. But see, having that opinion, telling something unique about yourself, I think is just so important. It's probably the difference between getting noticed and not getting noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And the other thing I would say is ask questions. So along with your elevator pitch, always be ready to ask a question, because people like to talk about themselves. So flip it on the head and think, what can I ask this person who is a recruiter at Google or a business manager at ANZ or what have you? What can I ask them? Because they will love to tell you about them, and actually they'll remember you for asking the question as much as they'll remember you for what you told them.
I think that's a good point, actually, Georgie, in that having really good questions is just as powerful as what you say about yourself. And I know when I'm out networking, I ask a lot of questions because I prefer to have other people talking than myself talking. And I'm not exactly an introvert, but I just get very curious and very inquisitive. Yeah. And I think, you've raised a really good point for people that are going out networking. Think of some really, really good questions you can ask. And obviously on the fly, you want to be thinking about what questions that you can ask people. But it's a really powerful way to connect with people is to get them to talk about themselves. And someone like Dom, when you're talking with Dom, if you get Dom talking about himself, you're going to build a really good relationship with him because he loves it, and lots of people do. But it's a good point about the questions.
Someone said to me once, one of the best networkers I know said to me, be interested and interesting. Yeah. And if you remember that, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. And I think use being from another country to your advantage.
Absolutely.
So, I do it with, if I meet someone from India, it's always, you bring up cricket, right? It's the first thing you do. If I meet someone from England, I bring up the Premier League. So use those unique characteristics that you have to your advantage and come up with I remember meeting Dom, the lady from Bhutan. I'd never met anyone from that country before. And I was just so inquisitive about what they did. And it became a really good discussion point. So, use your history and your past to your advantage because it's much more interesting than meeting someone that's grown up in Melbourne their whole life.
Absolutely.
We're soon going to run out of time, but I just want to ask a question about some advice that I was given early in my career, Georgie, which is about thinking about your career in 2-year blocks. So we meet a lot of students and graduates who think they have to have their career sorted out, the day they graduate. And we referred to this earlier on in the webinar. But someone told me, he said, just think about in 2-year blocks. So what do you want to be doing in 2 years' time? And then sort of work backwards from that. And then ask yourself the question, are you moving in that direction to be where you want to be in 2 years' time? So one of the gentlemen on the webinar today said he wants to be in data science. It's actually not easy to go from graduate to data science straight away. Data science is actually a hugely complex, technical, it's maths, like really technical. So you're not going to go to being an accomplished data scientist on the day after you graduate. It might take 4 to 5 years to get there. So the way I think about that is saying, well, where do I need to be in 2 years' time as a data scientist? Maybe it's using Python and Tableau to analyze data. Okay, the role I'm going into now, I'm getting exposed to Power BI. That's going to help me get along that journey. But where do I need to be in 2 years? And is the next role helping? It could be I'm going to do data entry for a company that happens to do data analytics, but I'm going to start off doing the data entry. I don't care. That's fine because I'll back myself in 2 years' time. I'll be doing more of the work that my manager is doing. So I just wanted to discuss that with you a bit as to whether you agree with my whole theory around 2-year blocks and thinking about your career in that way. And mainly it's to take the pressure off trying to get the most ideal job in the world on day one where it's just not a reality.
Yep. And I think it's a really smart way to look at it for a number of reasons. I think certainly it allows you to create a path where you can set attainable goals that you can achieve because it's exactly right. If you say, I want to be a CEO, that's, how long is that going to take? A lot of things have got to align for that to happen. And so it's a goal that's not really one that you can easily work on. But if you say, I want to work in an organization where they're global and international because I want to get experience overseas, okay, that's attainable. So you can make sure when you're thinking about the roles that you're applying for that you're focusing on those organizations. And it might be because that actually is going to set you up for success that one day you might get to be a CEO. But you've got to do it in bite-sized chunks that are actually achievable. And that you can feel good to say, I've actually, I've achieved that goal. The other piece for me is, and this current sort of environment highlights this more than anything, is that there's always going to be times when things are outside your control and you're going to have to pivot and change and move in line with what's happening, whether it's in your personal life, in the organization you're working in, or in the economy and at the moment globally. So 2 years means that you can be agile to pivot as you need to perhaps change what that goal might have been, but still be progressing your career. And the third thing I would say is that every 2 years doesn't have to be an upward trajectory. So in everyone's career, there's times when you move sideways. There's sometimes times where you tread water, and there's times when you'll really shoot up. And as long as overall, when you look sort of in your sort of 4 to 6 year time frame, that you can see a steady pathway towards, you're moving towards what you want to really achieve longer term, and you're improving and always learning and growing as an individual, then that's okay. It's all right if for 1 year you kind of sit there doing the same thing and you maybe feel like you're not progressing a lot because there was a lot going on in your personal life or what have you. It's okay if the economy isn't very good, so it means you can't get those promotions that you were hoping for because no one's getting promoted. That's okay. So give yourself permission to sometimes not move as quickly as you would like, and then your career will kind of go like that as opposed to just like that. The best executives in the world didn't have a neat little linear pathway upwards. It might have even gone like this at times. So just accepting that that's the reality.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
First time hosting a webinar. But I think it's a really good point, because no one has a linear career. Like, it's just, people think that, but it's never going to happen. And life would be boring if it was a linear career like that. So as long as you expect the unexpected, because the unexpected is going to happen, and then be ready for it. So, Dom, look, unless you had any closing comments, Dom, it is now past the hour, so we have gone over time. But unless you have any comments, Dom, we will.
I could be here all day. I could speak about this for 3 hours, especially with someone with the experience that Georgie has. Because actually, just the one thing, and that really stands out for what you're saying, George, is that once you get into an organisation, a good organisation, and in your case it was PwC, but it could be a startup, it could be anywhere. It's so easy to move sideways because organisations don't want to lose good people. And so hence, when I said before I didn't like audit, but I knew that was a good step for me. I went into audit. Yes, I didn't like it, but it was such a great pathway into all the other parts. So the final message really is for everyone. Yep, it's tough to get your first job. It really is. But once you get it, your network will then kick in, and you'll probably never have to apply for another job again. So you don't need to get the perfect job in your very, very first job. It's just a pathway to greatness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is correct.
Well, thank you, everyone. And Balvinder's just quickly asked the last question. Should we mention blue-collar work experience when applying for IT jobs? My answer to that is absolutely.
Absolutely. We love it.
Your experience is relevant. I've met employers before, professional environment, that love people who've worked at McDonald's. Love it.
Yep.
And the reason is for 2 reasons. One, they have been trained in how to work in a process better than anyone else in the world. The processes you must undertake and follow in McDonald's is absolutely leading edge. And go and watch the founder and the French fries analogy about how McDonald's has just systemized their entire business. And the second one is customer service. Like, McDonald's has to deal with some pretty terrible people at times, particularly if you're on the night shift. So you get really well trained in customer service. So do not think that any experience is not relevant. Of course it's relevant. It doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I can tell you now, there were lots of graduates that we recruited, and when you looked at their overall qualifications and applications, the things that stood out were things like, I worked at McDonald's, or I worked as a labourer every school holidays to earn enough money to put myself through uni. You know, there's something great about seeing people who are just happy to really roll their sleeves up and work really hard at whatever they need to work at in order to be able to pay for their university, you know, pay their rent and do all that sort of thing, because then an employer is thinking they'll roll their sleeves up and work really hard for me when they get into my organisation. So any type of work experience is brilliant to see.
I visited a dairy farm 2 Christmases ago, and if I ever see someone has worked on a dairy farm, I know that they're the hardest workers on the planet. So, you know, be proud of every single piece of work that you've done.
Yeah, agreed. Georgie, thank you so much for joining us today. I just love getting all your insights, and I'll learn something new from you every time we have a chat. So we appreciate you giving up your time. I'd also like to thank Bupa, and particularly Claire Cooper from Bupa, who has helped put it on and made this possible, getting these valuable insights. I mean, it's the part that is often missing when it comes to graduate recruitment, is just getting the tips of the trade. And as Dom and I say, the rules of the game. So you don't know what you don't know. So I hope everyone has at least taken away 1 or 2, or maybe 4 or 5 things from this webinar that they can go and actively do. You can do it. It is possible. Give yourself hope, be confident, and you just got to put the hard work in. And I think Georgie has shown in her career that she's been prepared to work hard, and shows she deserves the success that she has. So thank you everyone for attending. We will make the webinar live as well. So if you have friends that do want to watch it, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next one. Thank you again, Georgie.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care, everyone.
See you. Bye.